Oh, welcome back to Scuttlebutt, a Marine Corps Association podcast. I'm Nick. I'm here with Vic.
Hello.
And Will.
Howdy.
And we are going to be your guides through the episode today.
So, pack a lunch.
Pack a lunch. We'll keep it short and brief. Shorter and briefer.
As briefer and shorter as we do.
This is going to be a Scuttlebutt episode. We're going to talk about some topics affecting Marines.
Get in front of the scuttlebutt.
Get in front of the scuttlebutt.
Actually, we probably, and this one I think we're actually going to make it work.
What's stupid is we don't have our we need a real scuttlebutt in the office. That'd be cool.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I just learned, you learned me a little something.
Oh, you
today.
didn't know? Have you been doing this podcast for 10 episodes now,
I just thought
Vic?
it was something that Marines said.
Oh,
when you have a
okay.
rumor.
So a scuttlebutt, for those who don't know, is the water cask on a ship. So if you've looked at our logo, you see that it's a cask that's a microphone, and that cask is kind of representing the...
I thought it was like a keg, like an old-timey keg.
I mean, cask and kegs are basically the same thing.
Guess that's right. You have a water ration and a rum ration, right, on ship?
Yeah, and then the way that I understand it is that the scuttlebutt is like the water cooler talk because you're standing around the scuttlebutt on a boat. You don't stand around a water cooler on a boat. And that goes back to the days when there's 3 cups on a boat and you needed to get a ration of water. You would die of dehydration and all sorts of other nastiness. So
you get your rum so you don't get, scurvy, right? You had to drink rum to kill the scurvy.
A lot of times you had to mix the two in a grog.
Yeah.
So,
or they're just, alcohol.
Or they're just drunks. Yeah, but, I mean, the Marine Corps did start in a bar, right?
Yeah.
Rumor has it.
So like 10 or 11 sailors and other shipborne passengers would be sitting around the scuttlebutt waiting for their turn to drink some water, talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
So that is the scuttlebutt, is the water cooler talk, is the scuttlebutt of the boat. So, like...
And here we are.
There it is. So this is us, the scuttlebutt.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice to know in the trailer?
Well, if anything, we are on time.
Yeah.
We just may not be.
All right. Well, we've gotten a lot of new listeners recently, so
thank you, by the way.
Yes.
Really appreciate all you guys' support.
I was
being a part of this.
thinking if we had 100 listeners by the end of the year, I was going to be through the moon, through the roof, into the moon, and we are going to shatter that, I believe, because we already have.
Yeah.
So, everybody who's listening, we appreciate you.
Hopefully this episode doesn't get people jumping ship.
Well, our last Scuttlebutt-ish episode without the interview has been our most listened to episode. Force Design 2030.
Well, because we had the heavy hitters.
Yeah, and if we want to talk about the comments on that, they fall into 2 categories. People who didn't listen to the episode and people who did.
Isn't that life?
And it's very obvious because the people who didn't listen to the episode, you can tell because they just get on and they're like, General Berger needs to be carried in front of a military tribunal. And
fill in the blank.
That's just social media, like the amount of times people share articles like, did you read this or did you just read the headline?
And then there's a couple people who get on there and speak very eloquently, and I wish there was more of you.
As long as they're not coming from like an Eastern European troll farm, I think we'll be all right.
Yeah. Who knows? I don't know how to. I know that there's so much of that going on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know how to tell who's who, though, I guess. I guess the trollier you are, the more likely you are to be from Romania or something. So, so moving into the episode here, I think what's on a lot of the news outlets is the vaccination deadline.
Yeah. That's not a lightning rod of a topic in any stretch of the imagination right now.
So we're here for the clicks, Vic.
Here we go. Here come the comments.
The clicks. So, and if we get comments on this, that's great.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how to opine on this. So they're saying that because the Marines only. Well,
let's just start. Yeah, let's start with what we know. Where's the Marine Corps at right now?
94% vaccination rate. As of...
Which seems very good.
Yeah, which seems great because I think that the countrywide vaccination rate is like 60%.
Yeah, 58.
58? Yeah.
For both.
Yeah.
I think for single dose folks, it's in the 70s or 80s.
Okay. I think that for Marines, we're only worried about 1 dose at this point, too. So, but it's still a significantly...
Yeah, like you said.
Higher.
If we're talking what?
Yeah.
180
180,000 Marines-ish, 178,000, 180. I can't remember what the numbers is. I don't know if that's
tens of thousands left.
Yeah, so less than 20, right?
Yeah.
I can do math. Hey, I've got a phone with a calculator on it. Stand by. Let's talk.
Well, so I guess to this point, I guess anecdotally, I remember that we had a very similar sort of churn when we were going into Iraq for OIF 1. We were trying to prevent or give people the ability to survive through a hostile environment. So we were getting smallpox and we were getting anthrax. And Marines were freaking out about this anthrax vaccination to the point where we were, no kidding, like discharging Marines. Like, you have to this date to be at this stage. Because anthrax was 6 doses. You had to take it 6 times, and then the booster was a regular thing because you just have to.
It was either that or the graft, right? There was a graft you could get, but I don't think the Marines were pushing that.
Yeah, that's so smallpox is a one-time thing. They hit you like 10 times in a spot. It gets a scab. You got to cover it up. That's actually when it's like an active culture, so you can't like touch it. And then like literally the scab would fall off. You had to like wrap it in cellophane and like take it to hazmat to throw it out because it's like an active smallpox culture or whatever. And then you leave a little scar, whatnot. Yeah, the anthrax though, man, that thing was like dumping cement into your arm. I thought, I was like, 25 or 26 at the time. I thought I was just, indestructible. So I got my anthrax. Like, that's not so bad. I went and PT'd and did like an upper body workout. And like, I couldn't move my arm the next day. It was just like, it was excruciating. And so, yeah, you had to get it like, I think the first one. And then the next one, you get it like a week or a month later. And then it's humid. So, so I ended up having to get, I think my final dose was like in country or whatever. And they had like a log book of when you're supposed to, when you had it. But yeah, Marines were just like, I'm not doing this. I'm not getting anthrax. And like, they were just like, all right, here's your DD-214, sucker. Thanks for coming out. And like, they're just discharging Marines. And the thing is that regardless of like your political affiliation or your religious, maybe apprehensions or whatever your thing about it is, it's a lawful order. Mm-hmm. And so that's our job.
You got to maintain the fighting force.
Yeah, and I mean, how would you want to, and especially like if you're getting on ship.
Yeah, that's...
Dude, those like...
If you're hot racking and you're like breathing into the same pillows,
I mean, for an Amtracker, man, you go from an Amtrak, which is a closed environment, into a well deck and onto a ship. It's like, and then you're like, for your troop berthing, it's like 3 high racks, and for the officer berthing, it's 2 high racks. I mean, you're literally living on top of each other, man. Like, just got to think about it. And so we get the flu shot every year. That's also mandatory. Like, there are things we do to keep the force sustained and healthy and ready to go, and so just think of it in those terms. Like, it's a lawful order, and you're already doing it for other things. So, like, why draw a line in the sand here?
But definitely other, like, especially my all my family members who've been in the military, the amount of, like, especially the older ones, some like, the shots that they've gotten that have been like revoked since then. And
yeah. Well, I mean, to be quite honest, like when my first son was born, I'm like, dude, 10 fingers, 10 toes, win. Like, we got it.
All that concoction in my body did not ruin my spawn.
Yeah. I like to think the medical technology has gotten better since, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So look at the bright side. You're at the pinnacle of American medical health.
Well, I mean, and then if you go, depending on where you go to in the on deployment, like, you got to start taking the malaria meds. Mm-hmm. I mean, dude, OIF-1 was more of a med-X than it was a field X, man. You just like pin cushion here, take this pill there.
Yeah, and especially like if the Marines end up in Africa, speaking of malaria, sometime in the near future, it's going to be worse than...
Yeah, I mean, same as Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's going to be worse than 1 or 2 jabs of mRNA vaccination.
Chesty Puller probably had to take some shots and pills, so if he could do it, you can too.
Chesty Puller took his shots and then he took his bourbon.
And as a historian, please back me up on this. I mean, when you look at a lot of the casualty rates where they were like losing, like they were at a force structure that was unsustainable. Most of that was from sicknesses, right?
Yeah. So actually, like a funny anecdote. My grandmother, one of her uncles or cousins was in World War II as a Marine. I think he was wounded on Iwo Jima or one of those islands. Comes back and they have like a party and there's drinking and eating, and then all of him and his Marine friends start vomiting, and my grandma always thought, oh, it's because they're hammered. Like, well, yes, but also because they all had malaria.
Oh man.
So it like, so especially like when you come off of that situation, it hits you hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's gosh, and then you have to also worry about like the little insects and things. They got treatments for those.
Yeah, it's just a readiness issue. Yeah. I mean, nothing will deplete your force faster than illness, especially because it's communal living. I mean, that thing's it's going to spread like wildfire.
Anyway, I think the only reason why we're mad about 94% is because it's last out of the armed forces.
Course. Yeah, if everybody else in the 80s would be like, woohoo!
Yeah, because 94% seems like a lot of. That's 179,000 Marines, 169,000 Marines. I used the calculator.
I thought you did all that in your head.
Math. Yeah, that's one of those things that you'd probably be the best at in the room here because like we got a historian. No,
I'm a creative writing guy.
You're a creative writing guy, but the point is, you spent time distances out there in your Amtrak days.
Yeah, I guess that was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
It's definitely perishable. If I ever had it, it was definitely a perishable skill.
There's always somebody nearby who could help, right?
Yeah, but it's more like, was that tracer burnout? So that's got to be like 3,000 meters.
Yeah, so I think that rather than being mad about 94%, people should just be like, that is a lot of damn Marines who are ready to go take care of business.
Just understand, and we were talking earlier, like history. You say it because it was your phrase. It was really great.
Oh, history often doesn't repeat itself, but often rhymes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So yeah.
Tune in next week for that one because
yeah,
we recorded these out of order.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good statement because again, like however many years ago we had the same issue and same apprehensions, and it's a career killer, man. Like,
yeah.
So if you wanna hang your hat on that hook, I advise against it.
Are you guys ready for the greatest segue we've ever had on this show?
Are we gonna get on segues?
Speaking, I don't know if that company still exists. Speaking of history rhyming, we're in the middle of another budget issue with Congress.
Oh boy.
And that just. It just comes up every 2 years now. It's like it's more and more often. And
well, yeah, I mean, and this is where when it comes to talk about numbers, like I'm out. But the way I understand it is, we haven't had a budget, like a no kidding, budget since like 2008.
Yeah, I think that.
And we've been living off of these continuing resolutions every year
ever since the bailouts. I think have we ever?
God, I think even the bailouts were after our last budget.
I think that they ended the budget era
of
America, which lasted 200 years.
Yeah. And so, obviously it bleeds over in like debt ceilings and, spending issues and all these other things. And then we had acquisition specialists in here, Colonel Howe, and that money matters because it's how you fund your programs, and those things are projected out not just every year, but 5 years, 10 years, depending on length of program, sustaining these programs. And so from a program manager standpoint, every time we get to this point where it's like, oh, the government's going to shut down, that matters, man, because as soon as the government shuts down, that ends the spending for that program, and people start going home. And just anecdotally, I was instructor for 4th Tracks Unit down in Jacksonville, Florida in whenever was it 10? Anyways,
10, great year.
I was there from 8 to 11, but I think in 10 we actually had a no kidding government shutdown, and like it always happens on a Friday, and so it was on a drill weekend, and so we're like, what do we do? And the guidance came down from higher, like, have them come in. We'll keep our fingers crossed that they come up with something by 11:59. So have them bed down, have them get ready. But come 12:01, if we don't have a continuing resolution, they got to go home, because one, they're not getting paid, so this drill doesn't count. Two, their medical and dental goes away. So if they get hurt, they're the ones going to be liable. We're no longer liable for these guys. We can't cover these sorts of things because we don't have a budget. It was gnarly. So yeah, I mean, the government shut down at 11:59, and by 12:01, we were shaking guys out the rack like, "Hey, dude, I'll let you sleep, but you gotta go home. Like you ain't gotta go home, but you gotta get out of here."
Yeah.
And so yeah, we were just done with drill.
I think
Saturday morning.
I think there was one in 2013 when I was in ROTC my freshman year at college, and like we go to class, and our cadre just doesn't show up. He's like I'm not getting paid for this. I'm out, boys. Like,
oh yeah, when I was in college, I guess it was a California budget issue, not a national budget issue. But they furloughed all the teachers, so like we had days circled where we just didn't have class. Like, just that day doesn't exist.
And so you went and did your homework then, right? You got caught up?
Yeah, I did my homework. I went to AM/PM, and I caught up on my study supplies, and and then I went back to the room.
Your liquid intelligence.
Yeah, my liquid intelligence, and I worked on that GPA.
Yeah.
Okay, without as good of a segue this time. So for those who don't know, the Marine Corps Association is trying to support Marines' professional development. And one of the ways that we do that is through battle study packages.
Yeah.
And I think we have like 20 up on our website right now.
We got a bunch. Almost within any region across the globe, we have something there. And so the impetus behind this is that you have, obviously Marines stationed globally, and they're looking for PME opportunities. And one of them is, hey, let's go out and not just walk the ground of these battlefields, these old battlefields, but let's like learn about them. Let's get the context, yada yada, where the blue arrows, the red arrows, all this really cool stuff. And so next thing you know, like we're hanging this stuff on the website, which you can check out on the Marine Corps Association website.
Professional development,
battle study packages. And so that way commanders can just plug and play if they're in the area, or if they have a Marine station there, they want to go do a battle study package. There's all kinds of resources there to help you learn, do PME, all this good stuff. And then William just worked on a new one for Kansas.
No, it's in I believe it's Oklahoma. It's
Oklahoma. Okay.
Yeah, so
that's what I said, right?
yeah, right what I said.
Oklahoma.
the old West. No, so for those who've actually looked at our battle study packages, most of them are written either by myself or Colonel Woodbridge, and I think Vic helped with the last one. And essentially, what we try to do is quickly disseminate what strategic impacts, tactical importance, and then just a quick, just general overview of what happens. The idea is like, what are the most important lessons you can gather from insert battle? So the one we actually recently just did, we were actually asked to write, was for the Battle of Washita. And for those who are don't quite know what that is, it occurred during the Indian Wars, and it's highly controversial. There's a lot of historians out there who would argue if it was a battle at all, and instead just a massacre. And it really depends on who you ask and what resources you look at. So obviously a very controversial issue, especially is the Indian Wars and American expansionism as a whole.
Which is a controversial time period.
Very controversial time period, and there's a lot of different perspectives and that you need to consider. So when doing this, we kind of had to get it out in the open, acknowledge this is going to be different upon who you ask. And me, Vic, and Colonel Woodbridge got together like a litany of resources that have multiple perspectives, so that if you want to research this further, you have those opportunities yourself, which is important because, I mean, you can only get so much from 3 paragraphs on the internet. So what we did is, especially for the Battle of Washita, we've like, okay, understanding that to some this may be considered a massacre, but what can our troops or soldiers, Marines today learn from this? And so we had to go through history and look through the events of the Battle of Washita and that whole campaign to determine, okay, what are the applicable lessons? And for this one, essentially, this has not been published yet. Hopefully, it will come on very soon. But the idea of the American cavalry using the winter to hinder the mobility of the Indians whose ponies were able to outmaneuver the U.S. cavalry regularly and beat them tactically, to negate that advantage, and the American cavalry, their horses could withstand the winter temperatures in the environment. So try to attack essentially the Indians when they're at their weakest. And that was sort of the big thing I wanted to hone, was essentially trying to almost break the rules of warfare at the time, because it's very difficult to fight in winter on the Western Plains. Your lines of communication are non-existent, or you have to make them yourself, or they're very limited. So to break the rule that you are supposed to be immobile during winter to attack the enemy when they least expect it was I guess the big takeaway we tried to get away from that particular battle study.
Yeah, and if you were to take this into a modern day context, which I think is, and when we had talked about doing this thing, I think we'd all we had talked about, well, maybe we look at this thing just from the tactical standpoint, like don't bring in the historical context, or let's. I think we all just sort of agree, like, well, let's lean into this thing. Even let's talk about the stickier aspects of it, because the context is important, especially if you're trying to. All right, well, what does it mean for today's Marines? To ignore the context of the battle and of the era, you're going to miss its applicability. And so I think about, like, for example, when we were, as we moved into Afghanistan in particular, where fighting styles sort of go through this continuum of the antiquated and then the highly modern. And one of the things that we had to come to understand was that for the Afghans, they had fighting seasons, and then they would just stop, because then they would go back and either plant poppy, or the weather was just the weather was arduous to operate in, and so when the weather would get good in fall and spring, mainly those were the fighting seasons. And it wasn't called a fighting season just because it was like arbitrarily pick up, like it was centered around weather. And so we had to understand that. And so I think, as you were mentioning, when you look at the context of this thing, and then you look at what did each side do as they did their own MET-TC analysis. And I think that's where we then find value in, even, as looking at these things as much as objective as we can, while still understanding the sort of particularly
interesting
context.
It's interesting that you can pull contemporary lessons from Oklahoma, notoriously flat, and apply it to Afghanistan, notoriously alpine.
In the north.
Yeah.
In the south, I mean, Helmand Province, man, it's pretty flat.
Is
dude.
it?
Yeah.
And Oklahoma also has, like, if you look at the battle study, it's very hilly terrain, and there is some rough features. It's not flat. But also another thing to look at it also is what was done well in those incidents, but also these battle studies provide an opportunity of what was done poorly. So you can argue that in the Battle of Washington occurred several years before the Battle of Little Bighorns. You could argue, in the act of destroying a village, taking 53 women and children hostages, killing all the men, killing a bunch of other women and children non-combatants, may have solved that problem in the short term and reigning the Cheyenne during that period. But ultimately, it didn't bring an end to the Indian Wars, and you could potentially argue that I'm not quite sure if I would argue maybe in these circumstances, but it definitely 100% did deepen resentment and could have potentially protracted the war longer. Mm-hmm. So there's multiple ways to look at this aside from how it was successful. You can definitely look at these things and how they were flawed, and bring and understand, like, those moral implications are important and do fit into the big strategic picture. Especially
when you're talking counterinsurgency. You're maintaining moral high ground is absolutely critical. I mean, it's a weapon. So anyway, there's a bunch of stuff in there, and William, like you mentioned, you're a critical piece to developing those things. So go in there and check it out, especially if you're not at a major installation. Or if you're in this area, if you're in the Beltway, I mean, there's a ton of stuff.
We got a bunch.
Yeah.
I live right there in Fredericksburg, guys. We got one for that.
We have a few. I have a few that I'm going to start working on. But like I said, if any of you listeners out there or units out there request one, please email myself. You can find my email address for the Marine Corps in the Marine Corps Gazette for my professional ones. Yeah, so please reach out to us. We will happily do these for you. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. So please give me an excuse to do it.
Any opportunity to geek out on military history.
You made me go look at a topographic map of Oklahoma. I hope you're proud of yourselves.
The more you learn.
Very proud.
I'm like, I lived there in Lawton. I remember there being a couple little mountains, and then it's just flat, and I'm looking just northwest of that, and it's like, for Oklahoma, it's hilly.
And then what do we got next? Well,
let's not rush too fast, guys.
You got something else?
Sit down and enjoy. I just wanted to make sure that we got back and started talk about the refugees a little bit.
Yes, thank you much.
Because
thank you for bringing that back into consciousness.
Don't want to lose touch of that. Kind of a little bit more of the logistics of it. We don't need to do the heartstrings tugging at this time, but
I think there's an understanding though that I think is valuable. As Afghans are starting to come off of the camps. And
getting into town.
I think we'd mentioned before, like many of them only have the clothes on their backs. But there's also a cultural issue that they're now having to come to grips with. There's a ton of trauma. The immediacy of fearing for their lives is not omnipresent like it has been for the past 6 months or so, for 3 months or so. So now they're coming to the realization of what has just happened and what they have lost. And it's a very interesting dynamic because from my perspective, being an American, living in America, that there's a sense it's a subconscious acceptance of American exceptionalism or a subscription to American exceptionalism, because it would make me think like, yes, what happened to them is terrible, but look, they're in America now, like awesome, like there's a silver lining here, and that isn't always the case. And one of the things that I'm seeing as I've been out trying to support the refugees is that whereas in one aspect they're very grateful that they're not dead, that their families were able to make it, and that we brought them here with us, but they didn't want to be in America, and they don't particularly think that like our culture is synonymous with their own, or they're not as willing to like accept the Western worldview, and so they're in this very weird place where they're in one hand grateful, another hand very they're lamenting being here. They're still very Afghan. They're still very much in a Afghan world, and that's the world that they wanted to be in, but that world doesn't exist anymore. So even if they wanted to, they couldn't go back to Afghanistan. But at the same time, they're not really all that excited about being here because they just aren't.
Well, there's probably something to be said, too, about they've been – one of the reasons why they're refugees is because they've been trying to build a better Afghanistan.
Right, there you go.
And now all that work they've been doing, all that effort, all that goodwill has just been tossed to the wind.
And they're almost killed for it.
They're almost killed for it. They've got marks on their head. They're now they're here in the States, and I think we took about 37,000 of them in. And they're all over the place. Like, there's a bunch of California, Texas, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania. Like, they're all over the place. So these 37,000 refugees that were all once centrally located in Afghanistan, they are now all over the place. They're far from any support groups they had before. They're far from their ancestral homes, their families, all this other stuff. I think it's worth mentioning that while we were in Afghanistan, Kabul more than doubled in size.
Yeah, I think you mentioned
as people
that, yeah.
moved into the city and started building the city up, and now they've had to go abandon that. And there could be ended up anywhere. Like they could be coming from, Afghanistan and then ending up in, Los Angeles and just living in the smog, and just they have no. It's a huge shock.
Well, yeah, I know. Talking to the head of the family that we've been supporting, he's just like, "Oh, it's really cold here." I'm like, "Dude, it's really cold in Afghanistan." Like, not this time of year, it isn't though. So I mean, there's even little things like that, like, "Oh, we weren't ready for the cold."
Well, yeah, Vic. So you've had obviously more like personal relations with the Afghan refugees than we have. Like, what has been like their general transition process been like so far?
Well, yeah, it's been. I mean, I will say like the amount of support and outpouring of generosity has been so uplifting for me to see how many people are just giving selflessly and are in a very authentic sort of way wanting to help. And so to that respect, or in that aspect, I just have so much respect for everyone who is giving so generously, especially with times being the way they are. On the other end of it, though, there's just such a, like I said, this realization now that they're not having to worry about whether them and their families are going to live through the day. Now that they're in this sort of relative space of comfort, they're now coming to this deep realization of like what was actually lost and how hard it's going to be to regain that life that you had mentioned that they were trying to, and actually were in many respects doing. They're well on their way to building the Afghanistan that they wanted, and now that's gone. So how are they going to build a life, an Afghan life here in America, which is so different than the culture that they left? And so it's just, I don't want to say there's resentment, because there's definitely did not get that sense, but there is just like this unconscious talk, like it's just, Ayub, who is the man of the house, just couldn't stop talking about like how everything that he's lost. I mean, he's just so traumatized by like what I lost all this stuff, and then like I have no idea what's going to happen next. It's so sad, and I my heart like goes out to him, and it's just culturally, I mean, just look at like women issues, and he's a pretty progressive. He's a CPA in Kabul, and so he's well educated, taught himself basically how to speak English, but yet like where he sees. Like just take like women's rights for example, like it's just very different than how things are here. And his wife, they're trying to navigate that space. So it's just I can't. All that is to say, like their fight is far from over.
Now, just to speculate here, let's just scuttlebutt the world according to Nick, Vic, and Will.
That's a scary world.
Would it have been better to not spread them out so wide?
So it's an interesting discussion, and again, history echoes, right? Or history rhymes.
Well, because you're part of the Vietnamese diaspora from South Vietnam. So like because I know Northern Virginia has this great Vietnamese population. In fact, one of the most American patriotic things I did was I stumbled into Eden Center in Arlington or Fairfax, and I wanted to get like a banh mi and go to the grocery store there, and then I just happened to be there on the anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and they were having they had big banners, American South Vietnamese flags all over the place. They had live karaoke on speakers, so I got to listen to a bunch of old men sing beautiful songs, but it was
destroy beautiful songs.
But anyways, but like as a historian who, especially a military historian who has like a particular interest in the Vietnam War, it was crazy to see like the real effects of war and how it's affected, and how like this community of Vietnamese in Northern Virginia has grown up. And it's interesting to see. You walk around and you see the building that that is like a tax consultant for all, and I imagine they probably do all the tax consulting for all the Vietnamese businesses in Northern Virginia, and like how they're able to build a self-sustained, strong, vibrant community. It was incredible. So, do you feel like do you think the Afghans have that same opportunity, or do you think is that going to have to build themselves? Do you feel
this is going to sound this is going to sound like really cliche, but the one thing about America, and for all of our idiosyncrasies, there is always that opportunity. The Afghans will be coming from a very rigid sort of social structure into a very fluid one, by comparison. So yes, short answer is yes, there is the opportunity. The reality on the ground, though, is I'm not certain. So where, and this is going to really, this could be an entire podcast series, but so one of the things you look at when you look at the difference between like immigrants and refugees. So if you look at an immigrant community, say like the Koreans, who were some were refugees, some were immigrants. So some of the South Koreans that came over with the professional class. Like they were journalists, educators, doctors, lawyers, blah blah blah, and they were coming over in a sort of very welcome fashion because they were either going to learn here and go back, or they were going to come here and then integrate into the professional elite of the society. Then you had the war, and so you end up with a large refugee. But there was already an established, like you said, like a diaspora of Koreans. Then you get the Vietnamese community that, like, almost overnight, it's just gone. Like, and the Vietnamese had no intention of doing any sort of American integration, as much as they may have loved the West's music and all these and that sort of pop culture stuff. They were very happy having that in Saigon. And so, yeah, all of a sudden they just show up here and it's like, all right, what's next?
Yeah, and largely in two places, too, just Virginia and California for the Vietnamese. So.
Yeah, and so if I am understanding and remembering history correctly, there was a very concerted effort to not have enclaves. Because of the already where you saw the Chinese, you saw Chinese in San Francisco and New York, Korean, New York, and parts of Orange County, California. Blah blah, and then so you had I think it was an intentional dispersion of the diaspora, but one of the things that facilitated that is that because Vietnam had been a colonial country for prior to Ho Chi Minh for almost a century between European powers, there was a ton of Western their society was predicated on Western education. Going to University of Paris and the French coming over, then tons of missionaries. The Afghans aren't going to have that because the Taliban had basically closed them off to the world. And so their education system and their professional academic elites all fled when the Taliban took over, because that's who the Taliban were gunning for, the graybeards and the smart people, because that's how they could hold on to power. And so all of those folks are already dispersed. So where then, and then there's no enclave because it's just a small group of them. So where are these folks going to go? And is America going to attempt? One of the things they did with the Vietnamese is there was a labor shortage for doctors and lawyers and stuff. And so as these folks came over, like when we first started, my family was in like Kansas, they were in Missouri, they were in Delaware. They were in parts that needed doctors. They needed lawyers.
Those are some pretty choice states.
Right. Yeah. And so it wasn't necessarily like, on the cover of travel guides and stuff. But at the same time, it was a way to get off the refugee camp, get your nationalization, and then be part. But what ends up happening is they get comfortable, start having children. Family is such a massive thing for the East that they just naturally all came together, and then you end up with places like Garden Grove, Westminster, California. You end up with a lot of the manual labor folks go to Louisiana and Baton Rouge, and Mississippi, Biloxi, Mississippi, to do shrimping out that way. Like you said, Northern Virginia, a ton of academics and stuff out here. So then you just through integration and assimilation, they all just end up coming back together.
Yeah.
And so you end up with these places that have these large
I actually lived in
populations.
Westminster.
Dude, it's amazing. My mom lives there now.
I don't know if it's true or not, but my neighbors said that the Westminster, California, has the second most Vietnamese people in the world after Vietnam.
I think that's right. And so for my grandparents, they never learned English because they didn't have to because the enclave was already there. And I mean, there's TV. There's radio. There's everything you need is in Vietnamese.
Yeah. So I guess to round out this discussion, aside from like donating like money and resources and such, like what can your average American dude such as myself or Nick or what can we do? Or is it
I'd say
take it with time?
Yeah, I say patience, like just empathy and patience, and just understand that like there's so much trauma right now, as these refugees are coming to grips with their new reality, and there's fear across the board, and just I don't know, just try to understand. Like, could you just imagine if like America were to fall, and even if you were to go to Canada, like
which is kind of what happened to Afghanis. Most of them are going into Pakistan.
Yeah, I mean, there's Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
I think Turkey's taking on a bunch. But it's just the culture shock and the sadness around where they're at and what's happening. So I mean, as much and like, don't take if you come into contact with a refugee and they're just not like just put expectations at the door and just let's humble ourselves and be patient and show empathy. It's not that they don't appreciate it. They very much do. They're just so sad and hurt and traumatized by all of what's happened. And they just don't know what tomorrow's going to bring or how they're going to, like you mentioned, recapture the Afghanistan that they wanted now that it's been absolutely obliterated. It's just, it's so sad.
Yeah, and we'll try and keep tabs with what's going on in Afghanistan as well. Like I hear the Taliban struggling right now with basic government functions.
I mean,
that was a given. That was
I was about to say it was like, it was predictable.
Yeah,
and it's what everyone warned against, and so now they're in practically a civil war with the new Al Qaeda offshoot. Or the new ISIS offshoot in Afghanistan. They're in a dogfight and they're not providing essential services or governance of any sort.
I was listening to, what was I listening to? Was it Jocko? I can't remember. I was listening to another podcast, the one that you shouldn't listen to because just listen to ours.
Or we'll just relay what they say over here. So
we'll just relay
have to listen to the whole thing.
I can't remember who I was listening to, but I like to do some field market research. And they were talking about the situation in Afghanistan, how there's like no less than 6 different entities now suddenly trying to fight for control of the country. So, like, it's not going to get better before it gets worse.
Well, and then, I mean, China and Russia are going to, I mean, they're
already
they're going to have to pick their proxies.
Yeah, they're already
in that.
They're already sticking their fingers in there, from what I can hear.
Dude,
so.
I mean, I think I'm saying this hyperbolically, but there might actually be some truth to it. But I remember when I was in Afghanistan and Obama announced that we were pulling out. Like, I want to say satellite imagery had showed like all of these construction companies like literally piling up on the border, like waiting for us to leave so they could go and pilfer the mines and stuff. I mean,
Oh, yeah, not surprised.
It's so weird that China has a border that touches Afghanistan.
Yeah.
It's just so weird. You don't think of it that way.
Maybe if you don't look at a map enough. I have a big one in my office, so maybe I have.
It's like this little finger that reaches out and is like, "I'm not touching you."
Well,
but
the thing that's going to be interesting about that aspect of it too is that I'm not even going to try to say the name because I'll butcher it. But the Chinese Muslims that are being oppressed,
the Uyghurs.
Yeah, thank you. By the Chinese, I wonder how that's going to play when the Chinese start to then treat and work with the Afghan Muslims, but yet continue to basically commit genocide against their own.
Yeah, that's something
I don't know what that's going to look like.
As much as a rocky relationship the United States has with the Muslim world, you could argue, like, I obviously I don't follow this too importantly, but like radical Islam, at what point are they going to start looking at China and be like, maybe we have a grudge against you now. just on the very nature of.
It feels like they've got to be right there, right?
Because I feel like, and this obviously is nothing official, but I want to say that one of the things that we were at least we were talking Scuttlebutt amongst us when we were in Afghanistan is that how we did those Chinese Muslims such a disservice because the Taliban was primed to start trying to alleviate some of their oppression. But then obviously with us being in there, they had to refocus their efforts, but they had an intention of taking their jihad global and not just focusing on the West only. But yeah, I think that's a huge...
So was it our fault or was it bin Laden's fault?
Yeah, I mean, it's everyone's fault.
Yeah, that's the easy cop out. That's honestly probably the most honest.
Yeah. All the dominoes
like
fell.
We were saying earlier, man, it's like if one thing that the human experience has taught us is that we're all equally stupid.
In the end game, yes. Moment to moment, I like to think I'm a slightly above average.
We have our moments.
I think I'll roll a 51 out of 49.
You can work a computer better than Thomas Jefferson. I'll give you that.
You don't know that. If you pluck Thomas Jefferson out of 1804 and dropped him right here next to me, he'd probably pick it up pretty quick.
Or have a panic attack.
What am I doing here in the Scuttlebutt office?
All my friends are dead.
All my friends are dead.
When you said Scuttlebutt, I thought I was going on ship to stand around and talk about getting my rum ration.
What the hell is this? That's the Potomac River. I know what that is. Nothing else makes sense. Oh, we're losing our view of the Potomac River, folks. You don't care, but it's
$79 million eyesore. No, it's going to be a fantastic facility.
It's going to be modern and it's going to be great in every way. And then they're going to be like, "What the hell is this Marine Corps Association doing in the shadow of our?"
We need more parking.
Glorious wargaming center. Yeah.
Tear it down.
I wish they would. Let's just kick us out. Like, we need to rip this Band-Aid.
We're going to do this thing out of a tent? What are you talking about?
Maybe we have to rebuild this.
There's buildings all over the place.
Just squat in somebody's maintenance closet.
I shouldn't be saying that. Okay. Disclaimer. The opinions expressed on this podcast are not those of the Marine Corps Association. Done. You guys got anything else you want to throw into the ring here?
No, I've talked way too much already.
That's impossible. We're not even at 50 minutes yet.
Well, this is a nice, touch base.
Yeah.
Hear our voices.
Do a little round table.
Yeah, we do work behind the scenes.
If you have any ideas, our dear listeners, for topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to message us at any of our emails address available on the Marine Corps Association website and in the Gazette.
And Twitter.
We have a Twitter?
We have a Twitter.
Like Scuttlebutt or Marine Corps Association?
Oh, Marine Corps Association. But yeah, you can hit us up on any of the Marine Corps.
If we want to start shift the Scuttlebutt, have its own Twitter account, let us know on the Marine Corps Association Twitter account. Hit us up. And then we'll think about it. We'll stick Liz on it. Oh, I should mention, the battle study packages were built basically by Liz and Abby and Harley. I think, Will, you helped.
Yeah.
Before Vic got involved.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure that all their names are mentioned as well. And we're not giving Will all the credit.
No. I
just most
the learning outcomes, not actually putting it together.
Yeah.
That would require me to learn how to use a computer.
And we already know that probably better than Thomas Jefferson, but
probably.
Given time.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us.
All right. Thanks, Scott, guys.
All right. Take it easy.
See ya.